Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Aron Nimzowitsch, My System. The customary quote, even a poor plan is better than no plan at all. From the Russian chess player and influential teacher Mikhail Chigorin, who played around the turn of the 20th century and is remembered as the last great player of the Romantic chess style. A brief review of the last part, where we continued our study of Chapter 9, the pawn chain, and discussed the concept of the transfer of the attack with illustrations given by Nimzowitsch. We also went through games number 19 and 20 of the illustrative games section of the book as advised by Nimzowitsch. So now, moving further into the book, we will go through game number 21 of the illustrative games section of the book as recommended by Nimzowitsch. This game was played between Albert Becker versus Aron Nimzowitsch in the Breslau tournament in 1925 at Breslau, then Germany and modern-day Poland. Albert Becker was an Austrian-Argentine chess master who was the unofficial Austrian champion in 1925 and awarded the international master title in 1953. Nimzowitsch writes of the game as following. The following game illustrates my idea of the two theaters of war in a particularly striking manner. Becker with the white pieces and Nimzowitsch with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. E4, E6, D4, D5, Knight C3 and Knight C6, where Nimzowitsch comments, the odds-giving style, to use Dr. Lasker's expression. Lasker means by this that one chooses a variation which one considers inferior with the idea of setting the opponent a difficult problem to solve. Lasker plays this style by preference and with inimitable virtuosity or artistic skill. It is this that might make people believe that the heel of Achilles lay for Lasker in his treatment of the opening. But such a judgment rests on an entire misconception. The move Knight C6 here was introduced by Alapin. It obstructs the black c-pawn, however, and therefore in the event of e5 by white, there is a very dark side to Alapin's innovation. Knight f3, bishop b4, e5, bishop takes on c3 check, b takes on c3, knight a5 and a4, where Nimzowitsch writes, not very intelligible. Better was knight d2 instead. Knight e7 and queen g4. Black would then have had to defend laboriously by knight f5, bishop d3, rook g8, queen h3 and h6. So a4, knight e7, bishop d3 and b6, preparing to attack the white base d4 by c5. Knight d2, c5 and queen g4. How is black to defend his g-pawn? c4. The answer is not at all. For all direct defenses would here be compromising. Bishop e2. If queen takes on g7 instead, then rook g8 and c takes on d3 to follow. So bishop e2 and knight f5. The g-pawn is protected, but the pressure on d4 is removed, and white now again gets a free hand to make play on the right wing. Knight f3 and h6. in order to be able to maintain the knight at f5. The threat was bishop g5, queen moves, knight h4. Lasker prefers, and rightly, the elastic defense knight c6 instead, and if bishop g5, then f6. An interesting possibility would be knight c6, a5. Knight takes on a5, bishop g5, f6, e takes on f6, g takes on f6, bishop h4. For now, knight takes on h4 would fail against queen g7. On the other hand, queen e7 would seem to consolidate the position sufficiently. So h6 and queen h3. How can black counter the elegant threat to break through? That is the threat g4, knight e7, g5, h5, g6, knight takes on g6, knight g5, followed by rook g1. King d7. My king likes going for walks. g4, knight e7, and knight d2. Threatening queen f3, followed by queen takes on f7 or knight takes on c4. Queen e8. The queen takes possession of the throne which the king has vacated. Moreover, she has her eye on the black a pawn, for which she seems to have a fancy. f4. The scene shifts. The old theatre of war vanishes as in a flash, and new plans of attack appear. White intends to attack the base of the chain by f5. King c7. The king proceeds on his walk. Bishop a3, bishop d7, queen f3, and h5. Where Nimzowitsch writes, White's king's wing provides him with a terrible instrument of attack. To blunt this was the object of black's last move. Bishop c6 to counter the threat knight takes on c4 would, however, not have sufficed. For example, bishop c6, f5, followed by f6, and the wedge would have been unendurable for black. As such, h5 and knight takes on c4. If g takes on h5 instead, then knight f5, and the king's wing, which had been all ready to march to the attack, is crippled. But if h3, then h takes on g4, h takes on g4, rook takes on h1 check, queen takes on h1, and white finds all his attention occupied. So knight takes on c4, knight takes on c4, bishop takes on c4, and h takes on g4. Naturally not d takes on c4 because of bishop d6 check and queen takes on a8 check to follow. So h takes on g4, queen g2, knight f5, bishop d3, and bishop takes on a4, where Nimzowitsch comments, a lunch under dangerous conditions. Bishop takes on f5, e takes on f5, and queen takes on d5. c4 instead would also have been difficult to parry for black. The defense would be found in queen c6. Queen takes on d5, but not c takes on d5 because of queen c3 check. So queen takes on d5, queen takes on d5, c takes on d5, and bishop e5. For then the establishment of the bishop at d5 via c4 could not have been prevented. But queen takes on d5 was played in the game by BECKER and bishop c6 by black. Black's king's position is threatened on all sides, but the situation is not hopeless. Queen d6 check and king c8, having regard to the planned combination. But king b7 instead, d5 and bishop b5 was also possible. So king c8, d5, rook h6, e6, bishop takes on d5. Nimzowitsch writes, this was afterwards pronounced the only move. Black had, however, another one, namely rook takes on e6 check, d takes on e6, bishop takes on h1, castling long, and bishop f3. Not bishop e4 because of e7, and then queen e5 to follow, and the white queen has now new squares for decisive operations. So bishop f3, e takes on f7, queen takes on f7, queen d8 check, king b7, rook d7 check, king a6, and black is safe. But bishop takes on d5 was played in the game by Nimzowitsch, and play continued with queen takes on d5, queen takes on e6 check, queen takes on e6 check, and rook takes on e6 check. Nimzowitsch remarks, white now has a piece for two pawns, but his own pawns are weak. King d2, king b7, rook e1, rook h8, rook takes on e6, f takes on e6, rook e1, rook takes on h2 check, king d3, and g3. Nimzowitsch comments, anything but a passive rook. That is rook h6 instead. So g3 and rook g1. After rook takes on e6, g5, f takes on g5 and g2, white's pawn at g5 would prove an obstruction. So rook g1 and rook h3, which is much better than g2. For as will shortly appear, it is important to have a clear road to c2. So rook h3, king d4, king c6, rook g2, a5, c4, rook h2, rook takes on g3, rook takes on c2 as highlighted previously, rook takes on g7, rook e2, bishop c1, rook e4 check, king d3, b5, c takes on b5 check, king takes on b5, bishop e3, king c6, rook f7, a4, rook f8, a3, rook a8, e5, rook a6 check, king b5, and rook b6 check, where Nimzowitsch writes, Professor BECKER is absolutely bent on winning, so it comes about that in the end he loses. The game continued, king a5, rook f6, a2, bishop d2 check, king b5, bishop c3, and rook d4 check. After 6 hours of hard fighting, to get such a problem check is hardly pleasurable. King e2. Right was king c2, rook c4, king b2, rook takes on c3, and rook takes on f5. So king e2, rook takes on f4, rook f8, king c4, bishop a1, rook e4 check, king d2, and f4. Now white may be said to be lost. Rook c8 check, king d5, rook d8 check, king e6, rook e8 check, king f5, rook f8, f3, rook e8, and white resigned the game. Next is game number 22 of the illustrative game section of the book. This game was played between KAREL OPOCENSKY versus Aron Nimzowitsch in the Marienbad tournament in 1925 at Marienbad or Mariánske Lázně, Czech Republic. KAREL OPOCENSKY was a Czech chess master. He was Czechoslovak champion in 1927, 1929, and 1938. He was awarded the International Master title in 1950. Nimzowitsch writes of the game as following. The following game shows how an advance on the wrong wing should be punished. OPOCENSKY with the white pieces and Nimzowitsch with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2, b6, e4, and bishop b7, where Nimzowitsch remarks, the expansive power of white's center pawns is less than might at first sight appear. Bishop d3, knight c6, knight f3, and bishop e7. Nimzowitsch writes, by this unexpected retreat, which threatens knight b4, black manages to muzzle white's mass of pawns in the center while still keeping his valuable dark-squared bishop. a3, d6, castling, e5, and d5, where Nimzowitsch comments, now the center is stabilized. Knight b8, b4, knight d7, and bishop b2. Nimzowitsch writes, the pawn chain e4, d5, e5, d6 called for the play c5, of course after due preparation. For of the two theatres of war resulting from d5, only one is available, namely attack on black's base, the pawn at d6. The other theoretically possible plan, that is in advance with pieces against the wing cramped by d5, must be regarded as nipped in the bud by the presence of an obstruction at c4. The only plan of campaign feasible here, c5, could however have been prepared for by h3 instead, followed by bishop e3. For instance, h3, h6, the best chance for black. Bishop e3, g5, and knight h2. Black will try to attack white's king's wing, but white's attack, knight a4, followed by c5, is quickly put in motion, while his castled position is defendable. Hence h3 and bishop e3 was the right continuation for white. So bishop b2, Castling and knight e2. White's pieces desert the queen's wing in order to demonstrate on the other. By this movement, however, the effect of his own center is weakened. For with the knight still at c3, c6 could be answered by d takes on c6, while this knight too casts a threatening eye on the point d5 as an outpost station. If, however, the knight at c3 has gone on a journey, the thrust c6 gains in effect. True, this thrust is not a present threat, for on the queen's wing, black is the weaker. However, in the end, he will come to it. The way in which the theatre disdained by white is made a base of operations by his opponent makes the game of fundamental interest to the student. Knight h5 and queen d2. The answer to g4 instead would have been knight f6. Black wants to be attacked on the king's side, since he regards that theatre as unavailable for white, as discussed on move number 12. So queen d2, g6, g4, knight g7, knight g3 and c6. Nimzowitsch writes, What sense can there be in this move? If in the end c takes on d5 is played, then the answer c takes on d5 would attain nothing other than the exposure of his own base at d6. Black then in this case would have worked for his opponent. For let us suppose black's pawn still at c7. The strategic advance indicated for white, namely d5, c takes on d6, after c takes on d6, leads to exactly the same pawn configuration, and that the one which is the object of white's efforts. This calculation, however, contains two logical errors. Firstly, white in advancing c5 will certainly not content himself with c takes on d6. This is only one threat. The insertion of a wedge, in other words, the transference of the attack by c6, would be by long odds the sharper threat. Secondly, white by bishop b2, knight e2 to g3 and so on has been untrue to his queen's wing. The just punishment will lie in black's becoming strong here. Queen h6, rook c8, rook c1 and a6. Nimzowitsch writes, a very difficult move. The answer to c takes on d5 instead would be e takes on d5. And black, it is true, would get two powerful pawns by f4. G takes, f5, g takes on f5 and g takes on f5. But after king h1 and rook g1 to follow, black would stand badly. The mobility of his e and f pawns would in fact prove to be illusory, whereas white's kingside attack would be a very real one. Black intends to play c takes on d5 at a moment when e takes on d5 is not feasible. So a6, rook f1, rook c8, h4, c takes on d5 and c takes on d5, where Nimzowitsch writes, since h4 has still further weakened white's position, the point g4 specifically, c takes on d5 seems to be in place. The answer to e takes on d5 instead would be knight f6 as in the game. Moreover, the threat to break through by b5 would be in the air. So c takes on d5, rook takes on c1, rook takes on c1, knight f6, knight h2, and king h8. Nimzowitsch writes, the white queen goes in danger of her life. For instance, if f4, then knight g8. If white had played knight g5 instead of knight h2, then queen d7, f3, rook c8, and the bishop threatens danger to her at f8. So king h8, queen e3, knight d7, knight f3, knight f6, knight h2, knight g8, g5, f6, knight f3, f takes on g5, h takes on g5, bishop c8, and rook c6. Nimzowitsch writes, a clever resource which is extraordinarily difficult to parry. Observe too that in the position now arrived at, it looks for all the world as if white had all the time exclusively operated on the queen's wing. By c4, c5, c takes on d6, on which c takes on d6 had followed, whereas black had sought salvation by a counter-attack directed against the base of the pawn chain, white's pawn at e4. Bishop d7 and bishop takes on a6. Rook takes on b6 instead would have been answered by rook takes on f3. So bishop takes on a6. The sacrifice of the exchange is very promising for white. Bishop takes on c6, d takes on c6, queen c7, b5, and h6. Nimzowitsch writes, this pawn sacrifice yields black freedom to maneuver. Without this, sacrifices at d6 or e5 would have been possible for white. Take for instance the following variation. Knight e6 instead of the text move h6. a4, bishop d8, bishop a3, queen f7, bishop takes on d6, queen takes on f3, bishop takes on e5 check, knight g7, queen takes on f3, followed by c7. As such, h6 was played by Nimzowitsch and play continued with g takes on h6, knight e6, a4, bishop d8, bishop a3, and queen f7, where Nimzowitsch comments, for now, bishop takes on d6, queen takes on f3, and bishop takes on e5 check would be answered simply by king h7. Opocensky continued with knight takes on e5, d takes on e5, bishop takes on f8, queen takes on f8, a5, and knight takes on h6. Nimzowitsch writes, black has his 33rd move, h6, to thank for the possibility also of the knight's intervention. A takes on b6, knight g4, c7, knight takes on e3, c8 queen, queen f3, f takes on e3, and queen takes on g3 check, where white resigned the game. Nimzowitsch remarks, for black will take the e3 pawn with a check and then the b6 pawn. Alright, we conclude this part of Aron Nimzowicz's My System here, and we shall continue onwards from the next part, where I hope to cover the remaining 3 games recommended by Nimzowitsch at the end of the chapter, The Pawn Chain. Here is a look at the recent channel support from my Twitch stream. Several new supporters: Pickled Panda in a Bottle, gkristiansen, Chess Coach John, and CainCalifornia. Chess Coach John is John Hendrick, a strong player from the US with a USCF rating of almost 2200. He is also a chess streamer. I will post a link to his stream in the video description. Do check him out. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care.